All right, good. Thank you guys for coming today. So we're going to do tissues and glands today and membranes. We're almost done actually with the material for the first exam. We'll finish off with skin on Tuesday, and then we'll do a review, and then the following week will be the first midterm. All right. We'll talk about the four main tissues in the body. Epithelial tissue and connective tissue. We'll do a lot more on those today, because the nervous tissue and muscle tissue, we will do that in separate lectures following. So we'll just quickly go through those, but today we'll mostly focus on the characteristics and functions of epithelial and connective tissue, which is the two tissues that are found very ubiquitously throughout the whole body. All right? So, tissue. This is the study of the cells that make up the tissues, histology. And tissues have extracellular materials as well. And when we talked about growth, we said growth entails increase in the numbers of the cells, as well as the size of the cells, and also the extracellular matrix, because that's all that makes up the tissues, all right, and the surrounding extracellular matrix, all right. And that's going to be important when we talk about connective tissue, because connective tissue is characterized, or it's classified according to how much cells there are and how much extracellular matrix is. All right, and it is one of the things you had challenges with it. So when we go through that in the modules, we'll kind of try to make sure you understand that. So of course, histology is study of the tissues, because tissues are made up of cells. It's pretty much looking at the characteristics of cells. So today we'll look at these two, and these ones we will study in separate lectures, later on. But we'll quickly brush through these. So we'll concentrate on epithelial, connective. But first, before we do that, we need to talk about the germ layers that give rise to the all these tissues in the body. About 18 days after conception, you have these three layers: the endoderm, the mesoderm, and the ectoderm. And these three germ layers, because they germinate into all those four connective tissues I talked about, okay, will give rise to all those tissues. So the endoderm will give rise to most of the internal structures, like the digestive system, all right, and these derivatives and some of those organs. The mesoderm will give rise to muscles, all right, and bone and blood vessels. Meso, middle, muscle, okay. So the mesoderm will give rise to muscles, and the ectoderm will give rise to the skin, to the outside. Ecto means outside, okay, and so that will give rise to the skin, and also the nervous system. The ectoderm, whereas the nervous system is actually internal, but it arises from the ectoderm. All right, skin and nervous tissue arises. So these are called germ layers because they germinate into all the cells, into all tissues, all of them in the body. They are pluripotent in that they can, there'll be stem cells that can become this, that, and that, which then becomes all the tissues in the body. They can be programmed to become any of those cells. All right, so epithelial tissue is the first one, and skin is actually made of epithelial tissue. The lining of all the organs in the body, the blood vessels, the digestive system, all those are lined by epithelial tissue. All right, so what does it do? It covers, epithelial tissue covers, and very little extracellular matrix. So that becomes the difference between connective tissue and epithelial tissue. Connective tissue has a whole bunch of extracellular material and few cells. All right, but epithelial is mostly cells, very little extracellular material. So you can see that epithelial tissues will be classified according to the cell shape, according to the number of layers, because there's mostly cells. All right. and there's always a basement membrane onto which those cells are attached. All right? And it's avascular. That means no blood vessels. Have you noticed if you cut your skin, the top layer has definitely no blood vessels, the epidermis. You won't bleed. But if you go deeper, that's when you bleed, because that's where the blood vessels will be. Okay? So most of the time has no blood vessels. Sometimes you call that avascular. Avascular, no blood vessels. So the epithelial cells themselves, all that is written here can be shown on this. Let's say this red part is the basement membrane. All right? And then these green are the epithelial cells. All right? So what do you see here? You see this surface here, which was in your modules, and you kind of had trouble with it. What do we call the surface? Does anybody remember from the modules? The surface that is exposed, the free surface. Yeah, you're right. It starts with an A. Apical, yeah. A lot of people had this question wrong the first time. So the apical layer is the free surface. It's the free surface, all right? And then this layer here is the lateral layer, which is attached to the other cell, all right? So that's the lateral layer attached to the other cell. And then this layer here, which was also in your modules that you can have challenges with, is attached to the basement membrane, so it's called the basal layer. Yeah. So this is the basal layer of the membrane. Okay? Does anybody know what attaches the epithelial cells to the basement membrane? It was in your modules and you had problems with that. Remember those cellular connections we did at the beginning when we were doing those desmosomes and so forth? Tight junctions prevent permeability between cells. So tight junctions will be on the side here, you know. But what about the basement membrane? What attaches those cells? There were two other ones we talked about. No, it's a cell joint, cell to cell joint. Hemidesmosomes. Hemidesmosomes, okay? Hemidesmosomes. Desmosomes will appear between cells, but hemidesmosomes, because you only see the half of it into the cell. So hemidesmosomes are the ones that you kind of had problems with that. Hemi, it means half desmosome, really. Desmosomes are like spot wells where you have an area of strong attachment, especially like in muscles and so forth that contract and so forth. Okay, so all this there can be explained in the exam situation. You can just draw yourself the basement membrane and draw yourself your cells, and then your epithelial cells. You can see there's a lateral one. The lateral sides are attached to the other cells. The apical is the free surface which is exposed, and the basal layer is the one that's attached to the basement membrane. And the attachment is through hemidesmosomes. All right, those are the one of the three. Yeah, because the desmosome will have, let me use a blue color. We'll have a structure on this side, a structure on this side, and then these little fibers that split out like that. So that's like a full desmosome. But this one, because the cell, there's only the cell and the membrane on the basement membrane on the bottom, you get a hemidesmosome because it's only like the half moon and then, you see, to attach it. It doesn't have to be one on the bottom because there are no cells there. You see? So they are hemidesmosomes. All right, so that's that, and it's going to bring us to how these, and this just shows you an example of squamous cells are flat epithelial cells. And the shape of the cell will also determine the function of the cell and which system you find those cells in. All right, so in the lungs, what is the function of the lungs? To acquire oxygen and get rid of carbon dioxide. So these are gases, right? And they have to pass through somewhere to get into your body. All right? So you can begin to see why you would need squamous cells, right? So, you know, squamous cells are like flat like this with the, you know, so that this whatever is passing through for diffusion and filtration doesn't have a long distance to go through. So the cells are flat. All right? And this, of course, is the apical surface, okay? Because it's the exposed surface, all right? And then, of course, the basal layer and the basement membrane here, all right? So this is just showing you an excerpt from the lungs. All right, and we'll go through each of these, types of epithelial tissue and where in the body they are found and what their function is. And their function is going to be very much related to the shape and the number of layers on it. So epithelial tissue as a whole, in terms of just the general functions, is covering. We talked about it. So it's protection. Like the skin is your first line of defense, right? The protecting layer. And normally what do you do if you get a cut of some sort? What do you do? You clean it, and then what else do you do? Yeah, you put a Band-Aid, you cover it, because if you leave it exposed, then there's a chance for infections. So that's why you always kind of cover it until it heals up and seals. Then other than that, so unbroken skin is the first line of defense, is protection. It's a barrier as well. Okay, if you were to dive in the water and you start to absorb that water, then that would be bad. Okay, you'll be like a sponge. So it's a barrier so that you don't absorb stuff. Okay. All right, and it also prevents water loss. And when we talk about skin specifically in the next lecture, we'll talk about all the structures on the skin in the integumentary system, like the hairs and like a waxy layer that always happens, is spread on your skin to avoid water loss, to avoid dehydration. Okay, permitting certain substances to pass through, right? Like we just talked about in the lungs, oxygen, for diffusion and so forth. All right, and we'll go through each of these and with an example and so forth. Secreting substances. All these glands are epithelial tissues. All right, some of them are unicellular, like goblet, glands or goblet cells in the small intestine, in the stomach and small intestine a little bit, produces mucus. All right, so they could be single cell or multicellular or unicellular. That was another thing that you had trouble with in the modules as well, in terms of classifying a gland that is a single cell. It's unicellular, all right? So secreting substances, mucus glands, sweat glands would be the multicellular ones, and then the multicellular ones will be classified according to the different shapes of those glands, all right? And how they secrete the product. And we'll talk about that when we get there. And of course, absorbing, like in the small intestine, right? Absorbing substances, glucose, amino acids, and so forth. Okay, so if you were ever to talk about the general functions of epithelial tissues, just think about the digestive system, think about your skin and what it does. And you can come up with at least 4, and you'll be okay. All right? So those are the general functions of all the epithelial tissues. All right. So we classify these because we said again at the beginning there's mostly cells in these tissues. So we're going to focus on the cells to classify them. All right. So one of the things is we look at the shape of the cell. All right. And the other thing, we look at the number of layers of those cells. When we say simple, we are talking one layer. Simple is one layer. It's easy, right? Simple, one layer. If we are talking stratified, we are meaning multiple layers, right? Multiple layers of the cells. If we are talking pseudo-stratified, then we are talking something that's one layer, but it gives the appearance of multi-layer because of the appearance of the nuclei. The nuclei are going to appear on different levels. That is going to appear as if the cells are stratified when there's only one layer of very columnar cells, long cells. All right? And then, of course, the last one will be transitional. Transitional, it transitions between 2 cell shapes. All right? And it usually reserved for organs that stretch, like the urinary bladder. When it fills up, it's stretching. So the cells are normally like 4 to 5 layers of these, or 5 layers when the organ is not stretched, and they are cuboidal in shape. All right. When the organ is stretched, like when your bladder fills up with urine, then you have a fewer layers, and they are more squamous. You can imagine that, right? When you stretch it, then the cells become flatter, and the layers kind of sort of get reduced because the cells kind of spread out like that. All right? So it's called transition because it will transition from cuboidal shapes when it's not stretched to flat squamous cells when it's stretched. Okay? So that makes sense? Okay, so gotta know these ways in which all these tissues are classified. All right? And cell shape, squamous, we talked about it, is flat cells, and flat cells lend themselves for diffusion and things like that. In the next slide, I'll show you what each of these characteristics is, and the functions that suit those characteristics. And cuboidal, almost cube-shaped, all right? And columnar, long cells, they look like a column. All right, so good. So now, so we're going to talk about what each of those, types of epithelial tissue and the functions they're involved in. So the first one, of course, we kind of touched on the first time, is the squamous, simple squamous. One layer, okay, and flat. Okay, one layer again because of what? Why maybe not 2 flat cell layers there? Yeah, we just said it is related to, yeah, for diffusion, all right? For efficiency in diffusion, right? Imagine if you had a longer distance for the oxygen to pass your cells in the lung, but then you'll be suffocating, before the oxygen gets into your blood, right? You know what I'm saying? So you need a quick distance and a very short kind of diffusion through. So a flat, one layer is good enough, okay? So the function, the shape and the, number of cells, layers they are, determines the function. And it makes sense, all right? So the alveoli of the lung, okay, and the blood vessels as well, the endothelium of the capillaries. The capillaries are 1 cell layer thick, and those are flat, okay? So that the lung is a good example for that. So lungs, all right, and 1 layer and flat or squamous, all right. So and this is diffusion, all right. And then simple cuboidal. These shapes have more volume, all right. These shapes have more volume, and they line the kidneys, and this was in the module as well. Kidneys, all right, and the choroid plexus of the brain, the one that makes the cerebrospinal fluid. So you can see the bigger the cell, it will start to create some sort of product. Because here, and most of the glands, you will see that they're made of cuboidal or multi-layer or columnar cells, okay? Because there are some glands where the cell will actually pinch off and it's secreted. So if you have a very small flat cell, it's not going to work properly. So, oh crapper. Oh, this thing. I thought it was a bug. I thought it was a big old spider or something. I was like, what? Okay. So cells that are bigger in volume-wise, they tend to be part of glands for secretion. All right? Okay, so cube-shaped cells will be found there in the lungs, in the kidneys, and also in the choroid plexus, and in the bronchioles, so the terminal bronchioles. The terminal bronchioles, they produce what? Some surfactant, so that, to reduce surface tension. Okay? So cells that tend to produce something tend to be cuboidal or bigger in volume, right? And cells where diffusion is important tends to be flat, less volume, so that it's fast. So these ones secrete kidneys, okay, cube-shaped. All right, and all these make sense. What's that? They're still single layer, but because they kind of secrete something, the cells have more volume. Yeah, they have more. We're gonna start talking about just one layer, simple, and changing cell shape, and then we'll start talking about multiple layers and some of the functions. All right. So cube shape, it means secrete something. All right. So, and then this is another simple, and it's columnar. All right. And in this one, sometimes they are ciliated, like in your bronchioles, in the lung. Okay. The tubes. Remember in that other time I was talking about the uterus and how uterine lining, the uterine tubes, and how it moves the egg along. So those will be columnar cells with the cilia on top to move along the egg cell. Or in the respiratory system to move mucus and trapped particles. That's like sometimes when you cough out, sputum that is kind of looking off color. It is, especially when you get a flu and so forth. It's all those trapped particles that are being moved, and they are moved by the cilia, and this is the columnar type cells. All right, and you could even find some goblet cells in there that produce the mucus wedged in there, which are single cell glands or unicellular glands. All right, so these long ones in cilia move substance on surface and is columnar. But the important feature of this is that some of them are ciliated. They got cilia on them to move those. And you find, what's that? Some of them are ciliated. Move substances, because this kind of went on here and it carried on. So this is another word, on. Substances on surface. Yeah, move substance on surface. Sometimes if I'm moving fast, the thing just continues writing like that because it's magnetic, So that's that. So that's moving substances, and it's ciliated. So you get those uterine tubes, you get the bronchioles, and some of them have, instead of cilia, microvilli in the intestines, which increases surface area. It's a different function a little bit, but. Yeah, cilia or microvilli, depending on what the function of that system is. So the microvilli one will be in the intestine. Those cells lining your, and they have goblet cells in there too. Some of them are not ciliated or not don't have microvilli, but for the digestive system, microvilli; for the respiratory system, cilia, because it's moving surfaces on substance on the surface. Mucus, especially mucus with trapped particles. All right? So, and the gallbladder as well. All right? And bile ducts. In these, there's no cilia and there's no microvilli. Like in the gallbladder, they're just columnar cells. Okay, so that's why in the diagram, it's just showing a simple columnar cell with no cilia, no microvilli. The microvilli come in specialized systems like the respiratory system where you have the cilia, and the digestive system where you have the microvilli. Because the microvilli is for surface area for absorption. Cilia is to move substances like mucus and trapped particles in the respiratory system. All right? So, and these pseudostratified ones are ciliated, all right? And you find them in the nasal cavity as well. Nasal cavity, in the lungs as well, in terms of moving substances out, especially mucus with trapped particles. Because when there's dust outside, especially now, or pollen and all those things out there now that they are harvesting and whatnot, you breathe in stuff and they get trapped by particles, and that is moved by the cells. Yes, Spring?
It's only one layer, even though
it's one layer. This is the.
It appears
Yeah, it appears to be more than one layer. You know why? Okay, because of this is a line of cells, because of the nucleus, and this is another line. But it's really one layer here, but it's giving the appearance of as if there's two layers. But it's really one layer of cells. It's the way they are kind of arranged and the way the nuclei appear. So some nuclei in one level, some nuclei are on another level. So it looks as if you just look at the nuclei, you've got multiple layers, but you really have the one layer. All right, and it's and these are ciliated. They got cilia. So you have the lining of the nasal cavity, the nasal sinuses, all those where you have the mucus and trapped particles, and you're moving it along, and the bronchioles as well. Because in the bronchioles, you also get some mucus on top that traps any particles and so forth that get brought up to the top, and then you could spit it out or whatever you do with it because of the cilia.
So does that, when they're pseudostratified, does it make them, it's easier for them to contract in trachea?
I guess it's just that you know, the cells kind of go into each other the way the cells are arranged. So that's why you can see how they go into each other like that. It's really one layer, because here there's this one cell here, and here there's this one cell, but they kind of sort of go into each other like this.
Like more, so
They're kind of like more. It's like arranging them in a very neat and organized way so you can pack more cells in there. Yeah. But it's still one layer, and then it gives the appearance as if it's multiple layers. All right? So it's pseudo-stratified, but it's really one. All right? Okay, so this is where you find it, and these have cilia, and it's mostly respiratory system, pharynx, nasal, cavity, nasal sinuses, and so forth. All right, okay. Again, it's the same function, moving substances on the top. Now we are going to stratify it now. Okay, we are going to different layers. Okay, so skin is a big example of stratified squamous cells. All right, but the bottom layers are cuboidal, and then as they go to the top, they become flat squamous cells, and they become full of keratin. All right, keratin to dry them up, and they are pretty much dead cells by the time you get to the top. That's why if you cut yourself on the top layer of skin, you won't bleed, but if you go deeper, then you bleed, because those where the blood vessels are. And okay, so you have keratinized skin, non-keratinized in the moist areas of your skin, like in the mouth and so forth. Those cells are not keratinized. They're still epithelial cells. The lining of your cheeks, okay, not keratinized because they are moist. All right, so they're not, and the lining of the vagina, the anus, all that, it's stratified squamous, but they are moist. They are not keratinized. So they could be either keratinized on the skin surface or non-keratinized in the moist surfaces where the skin is moist. All right. So a big example is skin. All right, and it's many layers. Cube at bottom, and then squamous on the top. All right, squamous on the top. All right, a stratified cuboidal. This, like the salivary glands. Again, like I told you, the more volume the cell has, the more it is adapted to producing something or secreting something. All right. So your salivary glands, your sweat glands, all those are cuboidal, multi-layered organs. All the glands usually are multi-layered, except the unicellular goblet cells. All right. So these ones, secretion. When you look at the function, right, you get secretion over there, absorption, protection. All right, against infection. All right, so that's multi-layered and cuboidal. All right, so stratified columnar. These are column-shaped. The bottom ones appear a little cuboidal. All right, again, like the larynx. The larynx at the voice box over there. The larynx mammary glands that produce milk. All right. For the most part, all these stratified tissues are glandular. They produce something. All right. They're mostly glands. So here you got the mammary glands, you got the larynx, you got the male urethra, portion of the male urethra, and it's layered and cuboidal like this because passing out urine, is acidic and it's corrosive. So you need something that is protective. Instead of just having one layer on there, it will get corroded and so forth. So you need some sort of protection and produces some sort of mucus to kind of line it up to prevent, just like mucus is produced in the digestive system to prevent it from being digested by the acid, because the stomach produces a whole bunch of acid. All right. So again, bigger volume cells lend themselves to making something or producing or secreting something. All right. And then the transitional is one we talked about, where you have multiple layers that are cube at first, and when it's stretched, it becomes squamous, and the layers are reduced a little bit because the cells kind of spread out. And that is the urinary bladder is one of them. All right. Other organs that stretch, like the stomach, have rugae, which are folds, and that's how you can increase the surface area. But these ones, when it's not contracted, they are dome-shaped. You can see how when it's not stretched, they are dome-shaped. All right. So that's transitional, and it is used in organs that stretch. All right. You can see how squamous they look when it's stretched down here. All right. So that's the transition from cube to squamous. That's why they're called transitional, and it's multi-layered. All right. And these are just the functions associated with the shape of the cells or the number of cell layers. All right. And we've kind of been talking about it when we were giving the examples of all the systems where these are located. Of course, simple is diffusion, it's filtration, it's secretion and absorption. All right. In terms of just the simple, diffusion, secretion, and absorption. All right. That's one layer. All right. Stratified, secrete something, serve as protective as well. All right. The more layers you have, the more protection you have. Like skin, it's thick actually because of the multiple layers of skin. And squamous, flat, the diffusion and the filtration. And usually squamous, flat, diffusion, filtration goes with one layer, usually. All right. It's usually one layer. Okay. Okay. And then, of course, cuboidal, columnar, which contains cellular organelles, secretion. The more volume there is, like we said, it lends itself to. So it's volume, secretion, and also absorption. Okay. Because when you absorb something, you want somewhere to put whatever you're absorbing or to process it. If you have a very tiny flat cell, it's going to be hard to absorb something and then try to process it. So that's why you've got organelles in there, a lot of them, right? Okay, so these kind of make sense in terms of the structure and the function, the way they are related, right? Okay, so there we go. And then, of course, we talked about this last time in terms of what the cilia will do, moving substances on the top, on the surface, or the microvilli in terms of increasing surface area, such as for digestion in the intestines. All right? And then, of course, the free, smooth surface, like in the blood vessels. All right? It's got to be, that endothelial lining is squamous cells that are nice and smooth. Why? Because if blood comes against a rough spot, what happens? It clots, and then you have problems. Or, you can build a plaque on that area, and then the plaque will occlude eventually that blood vessel. So the smoothness of the blood vessels is very important. And also to reduce friction too. Because the more resistance the blood is facing in your blood vessels, the higher the pressure. So your heart has to work harder to pump the blood through. Okay? So smoothness is very important in the cardiovascular system. for more reasons than just reducing pressure. All right, and then of course microvilli, we all know what that is in terms of increasing surface area, and cilia for moving substances on the top. It could be the egg in the uterine tubes, or it could be mucus and trapped particles in the respiratory system. All right. So I want you to be able to associate these characteristics with the function and to be able to tell me why that is. Why, for instance, you need the smooth surface layer in the blood vessels. All right. And why would you need the microvilli in the intestines and the cilia in the respiratory system? All right. And the reasons are very intuitive. They make sense. They're not that hard to come up with. All right. So, actually, I thought I had shown you this thing, but anyway, you had seen it in the module. I hadn't shown it to you yet, but these are the junctions, because we're talking about the cells and how they're connected. I may have shown you when we talked about the cellular structures. I think I may have shown this slide again when we talked about the cells. Remember when we talked about cells? I think we covered a little bit about it when we talked about organelles and cells and so forth, and how they are connected. I think we just covered this a little bit quickly. But yeah, tight junctions would be between cells, or especially on the surface, to prevent permeability of substance between the cells. All right. So there will be a very tight connection between the cells. Usually there is like a band of that goes around where the tight junctions are located on the top. Okay. And then the desmosomes, the ones we talked about, like spot whorls, they are areas where the cells is strongly connected together. And you find these mostly in cells that are contracting and getting stretched, like the muscles. All right. So you see, that's what I was talking about. The desmosome is on this side and on that side, and then you have these fibers. And then the hemidesmosome, on the other hand, is on the basement membrane, and then you only have the one on the top. This is like a half desmosome, if you will. Hemi means half, so that's what that is, and it attaches to the basement membrane because there are no cells on the bottom. It's just that one cell. Okay, so it's like a mechanical attachment. It's like a spot weld. It's like an area of strong, connection between the cells. And then gap junctions. These are mostly found in cardiac muscles, and smooth muscles as well. Because what do? Gap junctions are connections between cells where there's a channel. It's like a protein channel. Remember, like we talked last time when we were talking about, it's a protein channel. So what happens is that when an action potential is running across the membrane, ions can go through very easily, and they can stimulate all those cells as if it's one cell, because the membranes are literally connected. It's like an electric connection. So gap junctions are important for transmission of action potentials between cells. Okay, when we do action potentials, you will see that. But gap junctions, you see, there's a channel here. So when the cell is, this membrane depolarizes, it will depolarize the membrane of the next cell and the next cell, because the ions can pass through there. Okay, so that's an electrical kind of connection. So those are the four types of cellular connections. All right, so now we go to the glands. Okay, so there's basic two types of glands. All right, there's endocellular, endocrine glands that secrete within. Okay, secrete within. And these ones don't have ducts because they secrete, and the secretions are distributed through the body in blood. They just secrete, and then it goes into blood, and the blood is what moves, so secrete hormones directly into blood. So secrete within. Endo means inside, to secrete within. And then exocrine glands secrete substances to the outside. So there's going to need to be some sort of conduit or connection between the inside and the outside. Like sweat glands, for instance, they have a duct because they will deposit sweat to the outside. So exocrine glands have, and they're all multicellular, all right? All these endocrine, exocrine glands are multicellular and unicellular, goblet cells. They are single cells that secrete a substance, like goblet cells in the digestive system secrete mucus. All right. So endocrine, exocrine, they secrete to the outside. Secretions are released onto a surface or into, into a cavity, like the pancreas exocrine glands, the ones in the pancreas. They will secrete to some cavity inside of the pancreas. All right. And then sweat glands secrete to the outside. They have ducts. As long as the material is conducted somewhere into an opening or a cavity or outside, it needs a duct. So it's an exocrine gland. Okay. So these are classified according to structure and how the products leave the cells. Because some glands are just tubular, okay, and we'll talk about them. Some of them are like alveolar, like in the lungs, like this, Tubular is just a straight tube like that. Some of them are multiples of tubes and compound tubular and so forth. And then how products leave the cell. Okay? Some of them, they don't have a cellular component. Like merocrine glands will secrete a fluid, right? And there's no cellular component to it. Then there are apocrine glands that will secrete what? Apocrine glands secrete what? Does anybody remember from the apocrine? What kind of cellular component do they release with the secretions? What's that? I'm talking about when the product is secreted and whether there is a part of the cell, if there is, what part, or a whole cell or a portion of a cell. That's what I'm talking about. How the products are secreted. So apocrine will have, yeah, go ahead.
Isn't it have ducts? Like,
yeah, they have a duct, but we're trying to classify them according to how the product is secreted. The first one, I said merocrine glands secrete just a fluid and there's no cellular component. Yeah, the mammary glands, yeah, because they have portions of cells. The cells on the gland will actually break off and be secreted, so that it's pinched off. So how the product is secreted, whether in terms of does it have a cellular component or not, or and some of them, like sebaceous glands, they secrete whole cells, and then those cells will be full of the oil, and then they burst, and then the oil and the cellular debris are mixed together to be sebum. Okay, so sebaceous glands are holocrine glands because they will secrete a whole cell filled with that oil in it, and then when it's secreted, that cell bursts, and then that's how the product is secreted. So you see, that's the classification of glands according to the shape of the gland, literally, and according to how it secretes the product. Okay, yeah, there were a few challenges with that in the modules as well. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next slides. But I wanted you to begin to think about in terms of how the product leaves the cell, whether it lives in a whole cell or whether it's just accompanied by portions of cells, or it's just the fluid component, which is the merocrine glands. So this is according to the shape of the gland, literally, how the gland is shaped. All right, simple, they just have a duct like this, or it could be alveolar. Okay, alveolar and acinar are almost the same. Acinar is just a hollow kind of like, it's just a sac-like structure. It may be filled with cells or something, but they look like a little circle. And then alveoli is hollow, like in the lungs. You have alveoli, which are little balloons, so they have to be free inside of it so that you can have an exchange of air. They fill up with air, so they have to be hollow. Whereas the acini, it will be, and then the cells will be inside like that. You see what I'm saying? So it will be pegged with the cells in it, and it just looks circular. Whereas, and then these are cells. You see the difference between acina and they're almost the same shape, but the acina one is got it's packed with cells, and the other one is hollow, and then it has flat cells like that. You remember the flat cells, the squamous cells in the lungs, like we talked about, okay? And then you have oxygen in here so that it diffuses through into blood, okay? So alveolar, same shape as acina, but alveolar is hollow, and the other one is it's the same shape but packed. Maybe in the pancreas, like in the pancreas, where it just secretes to. It's just you need the cells that just produce the product, and then a duct to conduct it wherever it's going. But in the lungs, on the other hand, you need for them for space for the oxygen, for the air to be in, okay, and so. And then there are some cells, separate cells though, that will produce this surfactant, so that you don't get that surface tension. Okay, so and then tubules, of course, they're tubes. Compound means it's a combination of many tubules or many acini or many alveoli together in a compound, if you will. All right, like this. This is compound tubular. This is compound acina or alveolar, because we're just talking shape now. All right. Okay. So and then a tubular one is just the cells that produce here, the glandular cells, and then the duct cells on the top. All right. Okay. So that's how cell shape is used, and then of course this is depending on how the product is secreted. Merocrine, there's no cellular component; it's just the fluid secretions. So no loss of cellular material, like sweat glands are merocrine glands, and we'll talk later on about two types of sweat glands later on. And then, so this is fluid. Apocrine, it's a part of the cell, pinches off with it, like the milk in the mammary gland. The milk has got some pieces of cells and, all proteins and whatnot. So that's apocrine. And then when a whole cell is actually secreted and then it bursts, then that's a sebaceous gland, and it's a holocrine. Whole cell, holocrine. So goes together. Whole for whole cell, right? Apocrine then is the pinched off cells plus the secretory products. So the entire cell is secreted and it bursts like they're first filled with oil and then they burst. All right, so very good. Okay, so now we move on to connective tissue. We talked about connective tissue at the beginning, and we said connective tissue has more extracellular material, all right, or more matrix. Like bone, it's got a whole bunch of matrix, and then it's got spaces in it called lacunae where the cells are located. All right, and we'll talk about the different kinds of, So when we classify connective tissue, we will be focusing on the extracellular material because there's a lot of it, right? When we were classifying epithelial cells, epithelial tissues, we were focusing on the cells because there were more cells. There's a lot more cells than there are, the other components. All right, so basic functions, like we did with the epithelial cells, basic functions. Okay, connective tissue, separating and connecting tissues. All right, like muscles, between your muscles you got membranes that separate the muscle bundles into separate muscles and separate parts of muscles and so forth. And we'll talk a lot more about that when we do the muscular system, and so forth, and fascicles and and so forth. So connecting tissues to one another, like ligaments, we talked about in the lab, connect bone to bone, and tendons connect muscle to bone. Support, like moving, your skeleton supports you, all right? Bones and cartilage as well in the joints, supporting, storing, okay, like adipose tissue is actually fat. It's connective tissue, stores a lot of energy. The bone also stores calcium and so forth, storage, all right? Cushioning, all right? So the adipose tissue is found in your orbits, and this was in your module as well, the places where you find adipose tissue, so around organs for protection and cushioning. Under your skin, subcutaneous tissue is fat, all right, for insulation, so you don't lose heat, all right. So cushioning and then, of course, transport. Blood, on the other hand, is actually connective tissue. It's just got a fluid matrix and cells suspended in it. Blood cells, red, white, and then some platelets. All right? So it's a fluid matrix. And where is blood made anyway? It's made in bone, which is connective tissue itself. Right? Is the epitome of connective tissue. And then, of course, protecting blood via the immune system, the immune cells, white blood cells, and the skeleton bones, like the cranium protects your brain, pelvic girdle protects your reproductive organs, and so forth. All right. Again, these functions of connective tissue are also more intuitive, and they're kind of easy to come up with, the general functions of them. All right. Oh, my God. Okay. So, and then this was also in the module, and you kind of had a few problems with answering these kinds of questions involving the types of cells. All right, in the connective tissue. So usually when a cell ends with site, it's a mature cell that maintains the matrix. It's a mature cell that maintains the matrix, all right? Like osteocyte. Osteobone site. It's a mature bone cell that maintains, all right? And then clast. To clast is to cleave, to break down. So osteoclast will break down the matrix of bone to finish calcium. So breaks down matrix. Osteoclast breaks. Maintain. Breaks the matrix. Again, we are focusing here on the matrix because there's more matrix here in connective tissue than anything else, right? Matrix. And then blast is a germ cell that forms or produces the matrix, like an osteoblast, for instance. So here I'm just using bone. Produces bone, breaks down the bone matrix, osteoclast, osteocyte maintains it. All right? So this is just the suffix that's used and then you just stick the prefix depending on which system you're talking about. Fibroblast makes fiber. All right? So that's that. All right, so what is in the extracellular matrix? Remember, we talked about it. Connective tissue have got more extracellular matrix than it has cells. Okay, so that's how it's classified. Again, it was in the module. All right, and then one of the things you had problems with was talking about the components of the extracellular matrix. So you're going to have a whole bunch of protein fibers in there. Like collagen is a fiber. So you have more collagen fibers in there, and then a few spaces of chondrocytes for cartilage. Okay, and in spaces. So you've got protein fibers, and the orientation of the fibers determines the strength of the connective tissue. All right, like collagen fibers. In collagen, they are all arranged in a straight line together like this, and that tensile strength, you can pull it apart. It's just like when I said take a piece of string or a piece of thread and pull it apart, you can pull it easily. But if you take it and then you put many bands going this way and you try to pull it this time, you won't be able to because there's many. Okay, so the orientation of the of these fibers will determine the functions of it. If it's like a tough membrane, it's going to be reticular. Why? Because the fibers are going to spread and face in different directions, so that if you pull it this way, it's still strong. If you pull it that way, it's still strong. Okay? But tendons will have collagen that is arranged straight. Why? Because then they're only pulled in one direction, like that. Right? Okay, so one of the components is the protein, and it's collagen fibers. Reticular fibers will form like a network. That's when you need something like a membrane that if it's stretched in any direction, like the pericardium, for instance, okay, it's stretched in all directions, so the fibers have to be arranged in all directions for that kind of strength. And then, of course, elastic Just like the name says, these ones stretch. Like the earlobes, they've got elastic connective tissue in it. That's why you can pull it and it will go back into its original shape. All right? Okay, so, and then what is called ground substance. It's kind of like the substance in between. All right? The ground substance, and this one is got substances called proteoglycans. What do proteoglycans contain? Those two main compounds we talked about at the beginning. Proteoglycans. And and carbohydrates, yeah. And the carbohydrates, remember we said carbohydrates have the ability, they have water molecules in carbohydrates. So these proteoglycans have the ability to absorb a lot of water in them, and then, you know, when you compress them, they lose the water. So, and then, but when you take off the compression, it goes back to its original shape. Like the discs between your vertebra, okay, they have a lot of proteoglycans. That's in the extracellular matrix. Okay, so we got the collagen fiber, we got the fibers in there, the proteins, and then we got the ground substance with all these proteoglycans and so forth. That enables the tissue to be compressed and returns to normal. And then we got fluid in it. All right, and it was in your modules, not cytoplasm, because cytoplasm is part of the fluid in the cell, but you just have fluid in there, which is probably the water that can come into and come out of these proteoglycans when you compress and decompress. So they have this cushioning, kind of shock absorbing thing to it. So 1, 2, 3 are the components of the extracellular matrix. You can see how busy the extracellular matrix is. So that's connective tissue, and it's based on the function. So there's this tissue that occurs in the developing embryo, and it's called mesenchyme. Mesenchyme is the mother of all the connective tissues, and it will give rise to all the 6 connective tissues. Okay, mesenchyme is the mother of all connective tissues, and it occurs in the embryo, you know, after conception. So you can form the mucous connective tissue and the mesenchyme itself. So that's embryonic tissue. Then you get the form loose connective tissue. Loose connective tissue is kind of like a filler, and it holds organs in place and so forth. Areola, you know, and then of course dense connective tissue. So dense regular, dense irregular, so and so forth. Somebody had a question? Okay, all right. So you got dense connective tissue, which is got regular, like in tendons, and irregular, like in membranes, in sheets. All right, and then cartilage. All right, usually found between joints and so forth, and then bone and blood. Those are the connective tissues. They are. All right, and they all arise from a mesenchyme. All right. All right. Anybody got a question? You're good? All right, good. All right, so we start with loose connective tissue. Loose connective tissue is also called areola, and this was also in your modules. You kind of had trouble with that in terms of identifying loose connective tissue as areola, and it's usually it's packing material between, like under your eyelids, you have areola tissue. You know, fills spaces between organs, holds organs in place. That's what loose connective tissue does. All right, and then adipose tissue is the fat, and that's the fat you find under your orbits, around lungs. All right, a very good energy store as well. All right, pads and protects. All right, so like your eyeballs, and then of course dense connective tissue is tendons. Like the tendons and the ligaments will be the regular, dense, irregular connective tissue, and irregular, anything that's like a sheet or a membrane like, you have irregular. And then of course elastic fibers, they can stretch and go back to their original shape, like especially the arteries. The walls of the arteries stretch and recoil, especially in fact when the heart beats and the arteries are stretched. When they recoil, you get like another beat, because the force is so strong when it recoils to push the blood ahead, you know. And when you do electrophysiology, you see it as a dichrotic notch. It's like another little beat when they recoil back, the artery. So the elastic tissue in here is very important. And as you get older, that's when you start losing the tissue as well. All right, and then your arteries are no longer elastic, and pumping blood becomes a problem. So areola, we talked about it. It's in the. You can see how it's kind of the fibers oriented in there to hold tissue, and you can find it in the membranes. All right, like the serous membranes that demarcate the thoracic and the chest cavity, and you can find it in the mucous membranes that open to the outside. All right, you know, in the digestive system also, the lamina propria, which is a layer that is all this areolar tissue in it, kind of holds the holds organs in place, right? Okay. And then adipose tissue, like we said, cushioning, energy store, all right, found in the breast tissue, found in the eyeballs, found around the kidneys, around the heart, for protection, right? Okay, so this kind of cushions and protects, all right? And then reticular, it's like reticular fibers all over the place like that. Organs that are kind of let's say mushy, if you will, or that like the liver, like the spleen. You know, the spleen has a definite shape because of these reticular fibers. Otherwise, if it didn't have those reticular fibers holding it in place, it will just be whatever. All right. So that's that. So that gives it shape. Like lymph nodes as well. They have a certain shape. In fact, lymph nodes need to be nice and open like that because they do what? They filter through blood through it. So if it was collapsed on itself, it's not going to be much of an effective filter. Okay, so these reticular fibers do that. They hold it in place so that, and then dense connective tissue, regular, like I was talking about. You see the orientation of the regular is in one direction. So it means if you pull it in that direction, like the tendons, then you're going to have a lot of tensile strength on it. And then irregular, like the dermis of your skin, because it's irregular dense connective tissue, because your skin has to be like a sheet and it has to be strong in all directions. So the orientation of the fibers has to be in all directions. All right? And here, of course, elastic tissue, the arteries is very important. All right? The earlobes. Okay? So it's got to be elastic tissue so it can recoil. And you can see this orientation of the fibers right there. All right? And you can see that they are kind of squiggled like this because when you stretch it, they can come back, stretch. Just like that tissue, the transitional tissue we talked about. All right? Okay, so now we're going to classify the connective tissue. So the cartilage is 3 types. Hyaline is usually what starts off the bone in the embryo. Starts off as hyaline cartilage, and then it becomes calcified, and then it becomes bone. Hyaline cartilage, all right, and then fibrocartilage, like the one you find between your discs. It's a lot of fiber in it, and then hyaline is the starting of the bones in the fetus. Starts off as hyaline cartilage, and then costal cartilages as well. Hyaline cartilage, the ones that connect the ribs to the sternum, and then of course the elastic, like the external ear, like the arteries have the elastic connective tissue in them, and then of course bone. You got compact bone, which is more matrix than spaces. Okay, remember connective tissue is more matrix, right? More of the extracellular material, and then spongy bone, or sometimes called cancellous bone, it's got more spaces than it's got matrix. You can actually see the openings. All right, so that's bone. All right, and then blood is a liquid matrix. What's the liquid matrix of blood called? Plasma. Yeah, plasma in it will be the white blood cells, red blood cells, platelets, everything suspended in a liquid matrix. All right, found in blood and produced in hematopoietic tissue. The red bone marrow produces it. Okay, and it's hard to conceptualize blood as connective tissue, but it really is, and it is produced in connective tissue itself, right? Okay, so, and we're going to show these examples and the functions. Hyaline cartilage forms the caps of the joints, okay, so that it forms a smooth articular surface, all right, for articulation. Hyaline cartilage also connects the ribs to the sternum, and this is what it looks like under the scope and the structure of it, all right. So you can see fewer cells, and the cells are located in spaces called lacunae, all right. More matrix, less cells. And then fibrocartilage, all right, like between the discs. You can see the orientation of it. You can see how many cells there are. Only a few cells. And the cells, the chondrocytes, are the ones that form cartilage, and they're located in lacuna. Lacuna is just a small space between the matrix where the cells are located, all right. And then elastic cartilage, you can see that in the ear, and the spaces, the lacuna with the cells inside. All right, the earlobes, the auditory tubes as well. All right. Okay, so, and then bone. Bone is actually arranged, compact bone. It's a sheet of that connective tissue arranged in concentric circles, which gives it the strength again. It resists compression strength just like metal, like steel, because of the orientation of those. You see how they're kind of arranged in a circle, like that? And then you can see the spaces, the lacunae with the cells, the osteocytes in there. All right? Okay, so that's bone right there, compact bone. And then, of course, the fluid matrix, blood, with the cells inside of them. White blood cells, red blood cells. All right? Okay, good. Muscle tissue and nervous tissue, we're going to quickly go through them because we're going to do these. There's 3 different types of muscles, really. The smooth muscle, which is like spindle-shaped, has 1 nucleus in it. And the skeletal muscle, which are also called skeletal muscle fibers, or as well as muscle cells. Why are they called fibers? Because they are longer than they are wide, and they have many nuclei in them, because it's just way too long to have 1 nucleus in it. And we'll talk a lot about it when we do the muscles. And then, of course, cardiac muscle, only found in the heart, and it's got specialized connections between them called intercalated discs, because that will have gap junctions in it to let the impulse spread through the heart muscle quickly, right? Okay, so those are the 3. All I want you to know is the 3 and the basic, characteristics of them, and that's it. Because we are going to cover them in great detail in future lectures. You can see a fiber, multinucleated, and the nucleus is on the outside. We'll talk more about why it is on the outside later on, because of the construction. I mean contraction, not construction, like they were doing at the Petri hall and stuff. Anyway, the cardiac muscle, you can see the difference. It's branched. It's got branches because the heart is circular. It's kind of like a heart shape. It's not like muscle, which is really long, and so the fibers are just arranged like that. But the heart has to kind of twist and contract in various shapes. So it's got branched fibers in the intercalated discs. And then, of course, the smooth muscle is spindle-shaped, and it is 1 nucleus, because the cell is small enough that 1 nucleus will work. All right, and you find it in the small intestine. You find it in the, the blood vessels. They've got smooth muscle, and so forth and so forth. Right. Nervous tissue again. We got 2 types here. The neurons themselves, that are excitable cells that conduct an electric impulse, and then the neuroglia, the cells that support, nourish, and so forth, the neurons. Okay, so only things I want you to know about it. We will cover this like for a lot of lectures in future lectures by itself. So I just want you to just be aware of them and the kind of, because it's a tissue in the body. So this is a neuron with the multiple dendrites, 1 axon. All right, and we will talk more about it, like I said, in future lectures. All right, and then membranes, we talked about them a little bit when we were talking about body cavities, so it's not new again. All right, and I did mention about the mucous membranes that line systems that are exposed to the outside, like the digestive system. All right, the urinary system, the reproductive system as well. All right, And so here, the membranes, serous membranes, they line the body cavities, like the pleura in the lungs, the pericardium, and the peritoneum in the abdominal and the pelvic cavities. Okay, they don't open to the outside, and they produce pleural fluid, which serous fluid that will lubricate between those organs as they contract. So we already kind of know about this already, all right? And they secrete serous fluid for lubrication because we covered it. And then the one we didn't cover is the synovial membranes, which are on the joints. It's the membrane enclosed organ that contains synovial fluid for joint lubrication. When you have arthritis, it is the inflammation of that membrane, the synovial membrane, and then the fluid is spilling out, and you're not lubricating properly between your joints. And sometimes they say it feels like this. You put sand between your joints and you're going like this, and that's how painful that is. And then of course we know about those. The blue ones open to the inside. They don't open to the outside. They are enclosed. The pericardium, the pleura and the peritoneum, and the red ones of course open to the outside in the digestive system. All right. And then inflammation, as a result of the blood being a connective tissue, just basically know the characteristics of it, which is, in fact, blood rushes to the area. That's why you have redness, and it comes with pain. The blood rushes to the area to finish white blood cells to take care of any infection that may have occurred when there's a cut or an injury or so forth. So it disturbs the function because the blood rushes there. So just be aware of the basic characteristics. Chronic inflammation is bad because, again, it disrupts the normal function of the tissue, right? And then you may have big problems. And then healing, I will talk about tissue repair. I jumped that one because I really want you to just have an appreciation of tissue repair since we've been talking about the tissues today. Just know this. Three kinds of cells. Labile cells can be reproduced and regenerate throughout life, like the cells covering your skin, labile cells. And then stable cells, the ability to divide is reduced, but they can divide when necessary. All right. But permanent cells, like neurons, permanent cells, they do not divide. In fact, neurons lack centrioles and they cannot divide. So, those cells, sometimes they can be replaced by satellite cells, like the muscles. They have satellite cells in them that can regenerate to form muscle cells. But once a muscle cell is formed, it cannot divide again. It's a permanent cell. But muscle, because you need replacement of muscle, sometimes the muscle tears. So there are satellite cells that are located in muscle tissue that have the ability to form new muscle cells or kind of fuse with already existing cells to,
That would be stable cells?
That would be permanent cells. It's just that there are certain in the brain, the permanent neurons, unfortunately, there are no cells that can actually produce the neurons. But in such the muscles work all the time, and the brain doesn't do work like the muscles do. You know what I'm saying? It's really just there, but it controls all the activities in the body. But the muscle contracts and sometimes tears, so it's a permanent muscle. It would be bad if it couldn't be regenerated, because once it tears, then you're done for the day. Okay? Yeah, it won't heal. So, but you have satellite cells that will replace those cells. Okay, they have the ability they are like stem cells located in the muscles that can then form new muscle tissue or repair or fuse with it. Okay, so tissue repairs, of course, involves clotting first to stop the bleeding, because you don't want to continue to lose blood. So you clot, then after you clot, then inflammation really occurs. If inflammation occurs before clotting, what happens? You bleed out, because then there's nothing is closing it, because inflammation is really rushing, a lot of blood rushing to the area. That's why it becomes red and it's inflamed and it's hot, because the blood carries the heat. So clotting first, inflammation, formation of what is called granulation tissue, which is then replaced using fibroblasts, mixing new cells to replace it, and then scar tissue forms.
So granulation tissue would be like a scab?
Well, it's the tissue that is transitional or intermediate between the final types of cells to replace whatever. It's like the first makings of the cells that will replace what was injured.
So like
and then it becomes that tissue. Yeah, it's kind of sort of like a almost like a stem cell, because it can then become that tissue. It will be then replaced. The granulation tissue is replaced, and then with the actual tissues cells for that. And then regeneration. If the wound is very big, sometimes wound contracture occurs. In that all this tissue will contract to bring the edges together so that they can heal up. Okay, if it's a wound contracture, but sometimes it can cause big scar formation and so forth, because it will distort the tissue by kind of trying to bring it together like this and contracting. Okay, so that's wound contracture, and this is just showing you those processes of clotting first, and then you form the granulation tissue, and then you form the actual cells that will replace it. All right, tissues and aging. I think this is the last slide. This is what happens. I wanted to talk more about this because of the skin and how it wrinkles up, because it loses elasticity and those elastic fibers go, so the cells will start to sag and wrinkle up. And then, like I said at the earlier on, you get loss of elasticity in the arteries as you get older, because the elastic fibers are not there, and pumping blood becomes a problem. And bones break more easily because the osteoclasts become more active than the osteocytes and the osteoblasts that make new bone matrix. So you'll be breaking your bone more, especially in ladies, because they lose the steroids like estrogen that normally inhibit a hormone that causes the bone to break. All right, and that's it. Thank you, guys. Thank you for bearing with 5 minutes with me. I appreciate it. I'll give you 5 in the lab. All right, so we can start at 10:05. Thank you, guys.